Week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units. I would add this week the first one, the Los Angeles Chargers. They're out there in tons of fantasy leagues after they got dropped in 62% while they were on bye. And this week, a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders that give up the third most fantasy points to defenses on the league. And we just saw the Cleveland Browns come out there and have 10 sacks in that ball game. So the last few games for the Chargers D, Week 9 at Tennessee, 14 points allowed, 4 sacks. Week 10 versus Pittsburgh, 10 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery. In Week 11 at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they went out there and got the doors blown off, though, before the bye. 35 points allowed, an interception. So this week is a good streaming option. Like I said, versus the Raiders, a bad offensive line. Geno Smith's been a turnover machine all season long. I like the Chargers as an ad this week. The next DST is the Atlanta Falcons. So the Falcons, they just make this list available in 51% of fantasy leagues. And this week, it's a good matchup coming up for this Falcon team at the New York Jets that give up the 6th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So Atlanta, they've been going out there the last few weeks and they've been putting up some points. Week 10 in Indianapolis, I know they gave up 31 points, but 7 sacks, interception, a fumble recovery. Week 11 versus Carolina, 30 points allowed, 5 sacks. And then Week 12, a dominating performance at the Saints, 4 points allowed, only 5 sacks, an interception, and a fumble recovery. So like I said, this Atlanta Falcon team, they're weird defense all season long. They're going to give up points, but they get to the quarterback. They create some turnovers. And this week versus one of the worst teams in the league at the New York Jets, that Tyrod Taylor most likely will be in there quarterback once again. I think Atlanta, they could get to Tyrod a couple times, create a couple turnovers, and this could be a ball game where they hold them to the mid-teens, low 20s. So they're definitely an ad this week out there in 51% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars, they've been a weird defense as well where they're giving up points. But this week, a great streaming option at the Tennessee Titans that give up the most fantasy points to DSTs on the season the last few weeks for this Jaguar team. Week 10 at Houston, 30 points allowed, 2 sacks, an INT, a fumble recovery, a return touchdown. Week 11 versus the Chargers, 6 points allowed, 3 sacks, an INT. In Week 12 at Arizona, 18 points allowed and 6 sacks. At Jacksonville, they get to the quarterback. Cam Ward, he's behind a pretty bad offensive line over there in Tennessee. He's taking his hits and his turnovers all season long. And like I said, Jacksonville, last couple weeks now, they're starting to right the ship a little bit. And this week at the Tennessee Titans, I think this defense could go out there as a good option. And they're out there in 58% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Indianapolis Colts. A lot of teams dropped Indianapolis off their teams, and they're out there in 71% of fantasy leagues. But I thought they did a decent job in a tough loss where Kansas City Chiefs came back and won that ball game in Week 12 at Arrowhead. So the last few weeks for this Colt defense, Week 9 at Pittsburgh, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 10 versus Atlanta, 25 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. In Week 12 at the Chiefs, like I said, I thought they did a decent job. 23 points allowed, 4 sacks, an INT, a fumble recovery, where the Chiefs, they had to fight tooth and nail to pull that ball game out and earn every point. So this week, a good matchup versus Houston. Looks like C.J. Stroud's going to come back to the lineup. The running game this season's been a struggle for them with Woody Marks and Nick Chubb in the backfield. And I think Indianapolis still do what they do. They get to the quarterback, one of the better sack units in the league. And Houston, like I said, their offense I don't think is all that great, even with Stroud returning, with their team in the mid-teens, low 20s, more weeks than not they're going to score. So with all those factors, and it's a division game where these teams know each other, I think Indianapolis is a decent streaming option. And the final defense is the Miami Dolphins, definitely a streaming option out there in 98% of fantasy leagues, and they're coming off a bye as well this week, but with a good matchup here versus New Orleans Saints. They give up the 11th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So like I said, I know Miami's defense isn't good, but I'm just playing off a matchup. And this week, it's a great matchup versus New Orleans Saints. Week 9 versus Baltimore, 28 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 10 versus Buffalo, 13 points allowed, 3 sacks, an INT, 2 fumble recoveries. In Week 11 versus the Commanders before the bye week in that overseas game, 13 points allowed, a sack, an interception, a fumble recovery. So like I said, it's a 1-week use, and they're coming off a bye with a good matchup with New Orleans coming in. I like the Dolphins as a streaming option, and then this week, that's a few defense DST units I would add for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.